All right, folks, well, welcome to the Scrum Master Power Hour. It's great to be here. It's great to see you all. My name is Patty. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in just a moment, but I'm excited that you're here supporting other newer and transitioning Scrum Masters. So I started this meetup, it was in the summer of last year, and it was designed to help support people who are trying to learn the fundamental skills of being a Scrum Master. So our backlog tonight, just to use our terminology, of course, we already kind of took care of our welcome. I'll introduce myself in just a moment, but I'll be telling you about a couple of upcoming events. We'll get into our slides and our conversation for today. And I'm planning for about 20 minutes for that. Like to get you in the breakout rooms as quickly as possible, because I always love to have you folks go in there, give you a topic to talk about. You can meet each other, and then we come back and we do a group share. Let me close this up. All right. So a little bit about who I am. So you probably all know me from LinkedIn. I'm all over there, but I've been posting on LinkedIn for about 2.5 years. And it was initially because I was struggling to find a Scrum Master job. I was struggling to get interviews, and it gave me a lot of visibility. So I've continued to do it. It's not always easy, but it has provided me so much opportunity, including starting my own business, which is what you often see is Agile Mindset Consulting. And I am passionate about helping new Scrum Masters. So I help them transition into the role and build those foundational skills to nail their job. So career coaching is what I do. We can do that in a one-on-one setting, or I do group coaching as well. You might have heard of the Scrum Simulator, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. I also go into companies and I do workshops. I like to kind of push the envelope on the topics. So this is something I'm excited to share with you today about my thoughts on doing versus being agile. And I also go in and do corporate training to help them, again, push their thought processes and start to think about things a little bit differently. So a couple of upcoming events. This is a bi-weekly meetup. So in 2 weeks, on the 18th, we will be having our next fireside chat. So I've invited Nisha Joshi. You may have seen her on LinkedIn. She has a podcast that she puts out all the time. But she's coming to talk to us in 2 weeks about being a true leader as a Scrum Master and moving away from manager. And as you might have noticed, in the stances of a Scrum Master, it used to be 8. They've removed manager because that really has caused some confusion. So she's going to be talking to us how to be more of a leader and stop being such a manager on our teams. So that's in 2 weeks. The invite will be up next week, so you can sign up for that and keep your eyes out for that as well. The other thing, my Scrum Simulator cohort-based program, we are starting next week. I had one spot just open up, so if anybody's interested, you're looking to really get a good foundation in how to take your knowledge and learn how to do Scrum, so to speak, this is for you. So you'll experience the startup of a new team. So I bring 5 people together and I stand you up as a new team, and we go through a 4-month process of behaving and acting like a Scrum team. So you'll do all of the events, you'll prepare all of the artifacts, and you'll actually play all 3 roles on the team. So you get experience doing everything. So you can have empathy for all of those folks that you work with. We'll incorporate all supporting Agile practices, build your Scrum Master skills according to the 6 stances of a Scrum Master, and help you build your brand, your network, and practice your interviewing skills. So if you're interested, just throw the word interested in the chat. I will reach out and contact you later on today, tomorrow, whatever. But this is starting next week, and hope to see you there. All right, well, let's get into our content for today. And this is where I'm going to kind of throw out some questions to the audience, and don't feel shy. Please feel free to participate. So the first question I have for you is, in your opinion or in your experience, what does it mean to know Agile or know Scrum? Because we're here to talk about Scrum as well. So feel free to call that out. I'm on mute. Go ahead and
being versatile, being lean. Is that what you mean? Or
what does it mean if you know Agile or you know Scrum?
This is Cherish. I think that it's, you know, the values and principles to live by.
Yeah, leadership.
Yep. Anything else?
I would say knowing would mean intellectual understanding, while doing would mean to put it into practice, while being would mean to internalize and live according to the values.
Yeah, this is our topic for today. Sorry about the car in the background. Okay. One of the challenges about Agile and Scrum are, and this is just based on my years of experience in working with Scrum Masters and working at different companies, is we can understand Agile and Scrum on an intellectual level. Right? We go take our CSM, we learn the facts, we can repeat the facts, but how do we actually put that into practice? That's where we kind of get stuck. And you might go into a company and see that they are struggling with getting the Scrum events in place, getting them to function like a well-oiled machine, getting the healthy backlog built, being successful with their estimation. Like, all of these practices are challenging because they involve a behavior change. So it's like a step up, so to speak, to go from knowing to doing. But then when we say being, what does that even mean? What does it mean to be agile? Right? We can repeat the facts. We can repeat the Scrum guide. We can hold the Scrum events. We can, write our user stories. But when it comes to saying, I am being agile, what does that even mean?
I can go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, usually people will say, I'm agile, I'm practicing agile, and there's this constant discussions between people. But finally, what I've come to as a conclusion is that being agile or doing agile is really about choosing what is really good to your company or to your organization with of the framework. And this is to mean that you can even start a project and, okay, the first stage, you can do waterfall if you want. Maybe let's say it's very certain how you will do the requirement collection, for example. And you can say, okay, for this phase, I will just do the predictive approach. And the other phase, which is uncertain or uncertain, please, you say, okay, for this phase, we'll totally go agile, maybe we'll use Scrum or Kanban. And then if you do that and you ensure your organization to meet or to gather the value that the project is supposed to bring to the organization, for me, you are being agile. Instead of sticking true to the step, okay, step one, I had to first build this. Step two, I had to have this ceremony. Step three, no. You can do this and you fail. But if you see that you can, okay, maybe mix up different frameworks for you to be able to deliver value to your company or to your customers, for me, you are being agile. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. When we talk about being agile, sometimes it sounds like some unattainable goal. It sounds very vague. People often say, we're flexible, we change on the fly. But what does that even mean? How do we even go about becoming that? Because companies are often very rigid and they're stuck in their ways and processes. So when we say to our teams or we say to our leaderships, we've just got to be flexible. We've got to adapt. Sometimes it's hard to understand, well, how do we start to even do that? And notice I'm using the word do again, because it has to do with behaviors. So it becomes very almost unattainable for people to understand. So they just keep doing what they've been doing. So I'm going to introduce possibly a new concept to you today. If you're a teacher or a former teacher, this may sound familiar to you. We're going to, I'm going to just share my slide here. We're going to take a look at Bloom's taxonomy. Now, if you have heard of this, go ahead and raise your hand, or if you've even seen this. Few folks. Okay, this might be new for a lot of folks here. Excellent. Okay. Bloom's taxonomy is something that if you are an educator, you are typically taught about in school. And it has to do with this pyramid structure way of understanding and thinking about how human beings learn. Now, when we go to the bottom of the pyramid, for example, this is where we're talking about knowing Agile or knowing Scrum. We remember things, we remember facts, we can recall them, we understand the basic concepts, we can give the definitions for them. If you go up a level, this is understanding. So we can explain these things. We understand the concepts and we can talk about them to other people in a way that other people can understand them. And this is a lot of what your certification classes will focus on. Teaching you the facts, helping you recall the facts. Maybe you do some activities, right? You get into the application, the next level, but that's kind of where you stop. So when you get onto the job and you step into that Scrum Master role, you're kind of like, well, wait a second, I don't even understand how to do this. How can I teach my teams how to apply this? So this is often where we get stuck with the application. So we go in, we might fall into the Scrum Police role, right? You probably are familiar with the Scrum Police. We tell people we just have to do these daily stand-ups. We just have to do all of these Scrum events. Just trust me, it will all work out. And people get frustrated because they don't understand the purpose and intent behind them. So when we typically stand up a brand new team, or we have new members join our team and we do some workshops, we focus on talking to them about the facts, explaining the definitions, how the framework operates, how, in a nutshell, we do the framework. And then we say, well, now we're going to just do it. We're going to apply this. We're going to change the way we work. And then we're just going to be agile. We're going to be flexible. We're going to change on the fly. We're going to get work out faster. We're going to become more efficient. And this is where companies and teams typically get stuck because they don't understand what they're actually doing these things for. So when we tell them, we're just going to be agile, we're just going to create new ways of working, right? If the Scrum framework doesn't work for us, we're going to try something different. And they really have a hard time wrapping their head around that concept because they're missing something. And notice how I skipped over analyze and evaluate. So we typically go from, hey folks, we're going to do this new stuff. We're going to do these Scrum events. We're going to put our work in a Jira backlog. And then people all of a sudden think, well, now we're agile. I've heard leaders say this. We've done the workshops. We're now in Scrum teams. We're agile. Patty, we don't need your help anymore. And I'm looking at them. I said, oh my goodness, where do I even start? So there's a huge gap in understanding, and it's because we skip over these two other levels, which are analyze and evaluate, to help people really dig deep into understanding what they're doing these things for. And then they can judge whether they're effective or not, and then they can make a decision. Should we change? Should we try something different? So the big question mark is, well, how do we do this with our teams? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to give you some examples. And the first few probably will sound very familiar to you because these are commonly what we do. We ask people to recall basic facts and the basic concepts. So for example, what are the 3 accountabilities on a Scrum team? Who knows the answer to this question?
Hey, Patty, may I?
Sure, go for it.
The product owner, the developers, and the Scrum Master.
Excellent. Let's go for another question. How many people does the Scrum Guide recommend for a Scrum team?
Usually 7 to 10.
7 to 10. Yep. Now, in a previous version of the Scrum Guide, they had a different number, right? 7 plus or minus 2. In the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, they say maximum 10. So while we don't have to follow the Scrum Guide to a T, we don't have to be like very rigid. In keeping up with the Scrum Guide and what it says, we understand that the answers to these questions change. If we don't continuously study and recall the facts and revisit them, we may not realize that the facts have changed. And I've seen examples of workshops being taught in companies where the Scrum Masters or Agile coaches are not up to date on all the basic facts. And I'm like, oh, they're saying the wrong things. I'm sitting there in that workshop and thinking, what do I do about that? Nothing in the moment, but that's why it's good for a Scrum Master and the Agile coach to be up to date on their information. However, so what that we know this stuff? Big deal. Well, do we actually understand it, right? Do we have, can we explain these things to somebody else so they understand as well? So here's an example of an understand. Explain the purpose of the daily Scrum. So who would like to answer that question?
I would go. Yeah, I think the purpose of daily Scrum is actually to track progress and to synchronize. Each member want to know what you're actually working on and how they can. How can I put it? Like, maybe 2 members are actually going to work on something that they need to be able to connect with each other. So you synchronize the ideas to be able to complete that particular to complete that particular task. So a daily stand-up is not just a status meeting, but actually to track progress and synchronize.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if, yeah.
Yes. So do your teams understand that? And I mean, this is kind of like a rhetorical question at this point, but yes. So if you are a Scrum Master, you need to make sure that you understand, you don't just know the facts, you understand them. So when you're asked questions, you're able to answer them so people can understand you back. So yes, it's not just a status meeting. It's, a daily touch point to inspect and adapt on the sprint goal. Yeah. All right, describe a retrospective.
I can take a shot.
Okay.
Hi everyone. I use this retrospective as a safe environment for the team to reflect back on what we've done throughout the sprint, what went well, what didn't go well. I also use it as to set action items that we can implement and process improvements as well. And then also I try in the retrospective to make sure that this is where, being remote for majority of our work time, that we can touch base to on our personal lives, just, reconnect as if we're in person and just have a few fun icebreakers and team bonding experience.
Super. Excellent. So again, another rhetorical question. Do your teams understand the retrospective? A lot of times they can repeat the information, but do they understand it? And many times teams will choose not to do a retrospective. They're like, we don't have time for that. We don't need to do that. And it's because they don't understand the intent behind it. So this is where sometimes teams get stuck. And you as a Scrum Master, being the educator, in talking to them many times over in order to help them understand these. And again, it's not from a Scrum police, but if we go up another level in Bloom's taxonomy, instead of just lecturing at them, which a lot of workshops are, and it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other, okay, how do we apply this? So we've learned this information. What do we do with it? How can we apply this to make our working environment, I guess, again, the goal, more efficient, more effective, happier employees? We feel empowered. How do we use all this new information in our current situation? And this is where sometimes Scrum Masters get stuck. Because again, if people don't understand the intent and purpose, they may not want to apply. So some examples that you probably all do: implement the Scrum framework on your team. And it might not be all at once. You might have to do a little bit at a time and continuously improve. But this is pretty common. Here's another one. Sometimes they will say, well, I don't want to meet every day. I don't have time. I don't need more meetings. And again, the misunderstanding is that the Scrum events are not an add to their meetings. The intent is to replace inefficient meetings. So all the pings back and forth, all the email chains, all of those meetings that probably could be an email. How can we reframe our communication patterns into these Scrum events? And yes, you may still need to have some of those ad hoc meetings and some of those other meetings, absolutely. But the intent is to get rid of the inefficiency and have these events in their place. Again, rhetorical question, do your teams understand that? And this could go back to the knowledge and the understanding piece. That's where the gap is. But let's take it up another level, right? Because sometimes we get stuck in the application and, falling into that Scrum police role. So instead of saying we need to do this or we need to do that, pose a question, ask them something interesting. You may have seen my post, I think it was yesterday, it was the balloon. This is on LinkedIn, right? The balloon, and then there was a pin, right? One ping will pop that balloon of deep work. So instead of saying, we're not doing these inefficient meetings anymore, put the picture of the balloon up and say, what does this mean to you? How are these pings affecting your deep work? Draw connections among ideas. So this is a post that I put up, I think this was a number of months ago. Estimates are not deadlines, right? And when we get into the analyze piece, then I start to get some, of course, negative comments in my comment section, because sometimes people don't understand what my point with posting this. But I want people to analyze, draw connections. So when it says estimates are not deadlines, you can put this up for your team and say, well, what are the main differences between estimates and deadlines? Have them do like a compare and contrast. You may have heard the term Venn diagram in school, where the two circles overlap. How do people treat them similarly? And what confusions or problems does this cause? This is a great conversation starter. And notice I didn't go to the team and say, you know, you're doing this wrong, or we can't treat these as deadlines. I put up a meme and say, what does this mean to you? Where are we getting stuck with this? And then it starts a conversation and then people get involved. But let's take this up another notch. Right, again, and this is where people start to misunderstand some of the things that I post, because I'm asking them to evaluate and they're looking at what I post as knowledge. So evaluate means justify a stand or decision. If your team is choosing not to do a retrospective, they need to understand the value, intent, and purpose of it and give you a good reason why they shouldn't do it. So here's a post that I put up, and I was scrolling through my feed. I'm like, wow, this was actually a long time ago. If you had to take one Scrum event off your team's calendar, which would it be? Right, and I put, you know, impossible question, maybe a tad bit heretical, right? And you can imagine that I got some comments. Well, you're not allowed to do that. The Scrum Guide says you're not in charge of the, you know, yes, that's a very knowledge-based response. But the folks are missing my point. My point is, if you took one of these events off the calendar, what would be the effect? And the reason I posted this question was because I was sitting with my teams, and this was, again, like a year and a half ago, and I was watching them run their own Scrum events. And I was sitting back as their coach, helping them improve them. And I said, if I didn't show up tomorrow, would they still show up and do this? If I removed this event off the calendar, would they still show up and do it? And I truly believed the answer was yes, because I could see that they did not need me to run this effective event. So that's your goal as a coach, to get them to be self-organizing and self-managing. I've also seen Scrum Masters where they go on vacation for 2 weeks and the team stops meeting. And that's because the team is dependent on the Scrum Master. So what you can do is put up the Scrum framework and say, hey, if we stopped having a retrospective, what do you think that would do for our team? And see what they say. Get them to evaluate why it's so important. What is the value that they're getting from this? Have them say it out loud. And if you are not there for a week or 2 weeks, they've committed to keep doing this because they know the positive effect it's having on your team. So again, this may be a heretical question. I'm not asking anybody to take any events out of the Scrum framework. I'm asking the team to evaluate what would happen if you did. And the reason is because teams and companies choose to do this every day. And if they don't understand the intent and purpose and they haven't analyzed it, they will do it without thinking. But it does have a negative effect on the team. And that may be a conversation that you as a Scrum Master may need to have and facilitate amongst your team members. So create. This is where we truly be agile. And this is where it gets really, really difficult. How do we create something new? How do we create a new way of working? How do we go beyond the Scrum framework? At some point, if your team is doing the Scrum framework really well, then it may become a barrier for them. It may become too restrictive. They may get so good at backlog refinement that by the time they get to sprint planning, it's just like pressing the button on Jira Go. Their sprint is already planned, their goal is already there. So is it necessary to still have the sprint planning anymore? And at that point, should you start looking at Kanban? And is that the team's decision or is it your decision? Is it your goal to ask the questions to see if they can make that decision for themselves? Or if they realize that they need to coordinate better between teams, can they make an effective decision how to scale it? Or is someone telling them you need to do SAFe or you need to do Scrum at scale? Can they figure out how to do it themselves because they can make a great educated decision? So just to kind of put this up here, you might have heard the term shu-ha-ri. So shu aligns with the understanding and the remembering of Bloom's taxonomy. Ha, which is the doing of Scrum or Agile, is the application. And that's where a lot of teams get stuck. And it's encouraging them to analyze and evaluate to help them actually be agile, where they can make their own decisions because they are informed and they are mature enough to have those conversations. So before we go into our breakout rooms, are there any questions? 0 questions. Okay, well, let me put the slide back up again. I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to, oh, you're welcome, Shun. And then we're going to come back and you can share what you discussed with your group. I will put this into the chat as well. I've saved this in a Google Doc, so you will have this for reference. But you will have this slide and your breakout activity for each of these levels, just like the examples that I showed you. Come up with ideas or examples of these things as they relate to your team. So what are some examples where you ask them to remember things? What are some examples where you ask them to understand things? And then see if you can push it up the pyramid here to see if you can come up with some things that you can take away and use tomorrow, where you can help your team draw some connections and have some evaluation conversations to push them beyond the doing and get them more into the being. Okay, so I'm going to put this link to the Google Doc slide in the chat, and I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. Let me stop share. Let me grab that link. Go ahead and make sure you can open that. And then I will get those breakout rooms set up. Let's say 3 to 4 participants in rooms. Okay, well, introduce yourselves to each other and then see what you come up with. Hey, everybody, welcome back.
That was too short.
That was too short. I know.
Too short.
You know what? I have so much material to cover. I felt like I wanted to get you in the breakout rooms as soon as I could. And I felt like I was rushing a little bit, but I know like that connection time is so valuable. So the conversation is just the beginning. Of course, you can connect with yourselves, with all of y'all, as they say in the South, offline and continue the conversation and the networking. But I'm curious to see what you all came up with. So who would like to share what happened in their breakout room?
Well, in the breakout room, we mostly spoke about when a new Scrum Master arrives in a company, they can ask to be mentored, so they don't only understand the events, but they can analyze, evaluate, and apply with someone who is experienced. And so, but we did not come out with specific example, but I have one specific example was when I gave a workshop on hieroglyphics, and people understood that the sense of the writings, that because it can vary. And afterwards, I showed another image with hieroglyphics going in many senses, and they were able to apply it by saying what was the beginning of the sentence and what was the end.
Everybody's mic on. Okay, mute that one. Okay. Yeah, it's getting people to think on a higher level. And some of the challenge with that, and for some of us, this might be a long time ago, myself included. If you think back to school, it was a lot of memorizing facts and spitting them out for tests. And as long as you spit the facts out, you get a 90 or an A or whatever it is. And that's what is expected. That's what's rewarded. It's the analysis that is lacking in our education system. And not only do we have to work on that ourselves, but then we have to turn around and help our teams do it, because they can't become self-organizing and self-managing if they cannot think for themselves. And as a Scrum Master, it is very difficult to not go in there and do things for them, like move their tickets in Jira. It's your job to influence them to realize that they need to do it for themselves, but not just that they have to do it. Why does it benefit them? That's the conversation to have. Analyze what's happening because we're not moving our tickets. What are the problems that are created? Those are the conversations. Iffy, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna touch base when we were talking about Agile earlier. I think as a Scrum Master coming in, you have to also understand that you have to really think 10 steps ahead, because your team is looking for you. They're looking for you for guidance, but at the same time, you want to get them to the point where they can, like you said, be able to handle things on their own. There's a difference between a mature Scrum team and a Scrum team, or a team that doesn't really know Scrum. So trying to get them to that point, so it can make your job easier. You have, it makes it like you'll actually be doing less work and you'll have less on your plate. But at that point, you have to really think, okay, who do I need to communicate with, in terms of whether there's like a blocker, or if they give you an update, do you need to follow up with that update, stuff like that. So just always being 10 steps ahead. Communication is very key with everyone on the team and people outside the team too, if necessary. So I think, once you get your feet in as a Scrum Master, you'll figure out that it's the little things that are important, and the little things, it may take some time, but after a while, you'll start to see it becomes like, like you have to get to the point where it's almost like you're breathing. So once you get to that point, it's like, it becomes a walk in the park. So that's what it is.
Yes, absolutely. And Omani, I was going to say, I know your hand up. I was going to reference to something you said in the chat. What is a good justification for not having a retrospective? That is an outstanding question. I can't think of one. But if they feel like they don't need to do one, they better give me a good reason. A lot of times teams will just say, well, we don't have time. That's not a good reason. It's because they just see it as another meeting. And a lot of times meetings are a waste of people's time. So they have to understand the intent and purpose, and then feel the intent and purpose, and be able to evaluate, when I don't do this retrospective, what happens as a result. And it's not good, by the way. All right, we have another hand up. Omoni.
Yeah, Patty. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, can hear me.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let me just quickly touch base on the retrospective thing you talked about before sharing what Mirandel and I talked about in the chat. So like I actually experienced that. I was a Scrum Master to one of my teams. The team is like very they are not so large. It's just a team of 4. So mostly they believe that retrospective like is a waste of time for them. Like they are so small, they are so few. Why do they need a retrospective, right? So when the team was given to me to manage, I introduced that to them, gave them all the reasons, but they said, "Oh, we are just 4, right? So I don't think we need it, stuff like that." I didn't push back, right? I told them, "Oh, if that's what they think, if that's what everybody thinks, I think I'm okay with it, right?" So, but in the course of the sprint, whenever there's any issue and we need to talk about it, I'll be like, do you guys think we should talk about this? Like, is it worth having a conversation about as a team? And they say, "Oh, yeah. Can you please set up a meeting for us to talk about this?" I would do that. It's retrospective, right? Because constantly they're improving on their processes and the ways of doing things, talking about issues that, they are facing, but maybe they just don't want to hear the word retrospective, right? But we are doing this, and we do this like at the end of every sprint. Sometimes it's not that consistent. I know retrospective has to be, but you can't force them, right? But we do retrospective, but because the team doesn't want to hear the word retrospective, I didn't push it to them that, "Oh, this is retrospective," but we just call it, "Oh, let me just set up a meeting for all of us to talk about the things that actually we didn't do well, or the ways we can improve our sprint, moving forward." And so that resonated more with them, and they are more open to that. Okay, so that was the way I dealt with that. But like Mirandel and I in the group, we were talking about being agile and doing agile. And one of the things that we talked about is doing agile sometimes could be very easy because, you already have these things laid out. You are just doing what you were told to do. Sometimes you don't have to believe in what you're doing, but maybe because you want to keep your job, right? You get into an organization and they are doing agile and they say, "Oh, this is how we do it. This is what we do." And because you need to keep your job, you do exactly what you are asked to do. You are not putting in more effort to innovate, to be creative, right? You are just following all the instructions. Unlike being agile, it comes with a mindset. It's what you believe in, right? So you are constantly putting in efforts to ensure that you are getting better, you are improving on these things. You are joining community of practices like this, you are listening to podcasts, you are reading, you are constantly building yourself to understand different ways, techniques of applying the agile principles and values to delivering values to your customer or to your team members. So in summary, those were the things that we talked about in our group.
Yeah, those are great. Those are great. And it's funny, I'm just like laughing because I've heard stories like that before. It's just, don't say the word agile, don't say the word Scrum, don't say these words, and you just do the things anyway and they're okay with it. But to your point, like they realize the value of it, but it's almost like the word is a blocker for them. And
Yeah.
I've heard that on a lot of occasions, and I don't know what it is. Maybe because we are so passionate about it and we love it, and it doesn't make a difference to us. But for some people, words make a difference. So I know that we are at time here. I just want to make sure, did any other groups want to share before we sign off? Just want to scroll through the faces and make sure that we didn't miss anybody. Okay. Iffy, is your hand still up?
Oh, no, Patty, sorry.
Is that intentional? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for showing up to your fellow Scrum Masters. Please connect with each other on LinkedIn, build the relationships, Networking is not just, a one and done thing. It's getting to know people, building friendships, building professional relationships, and you never know what happens as a result. But those relationships do take time and patience, like everything else. So I will be cleaning up the recording, and I will be emailing that out so everybody will be able to hear this goodness once again. And for those folks that couldn't make it, they will be able to hear it again. But I hope everybody has a great night. Yes, thank you so much. And I will see you in 2 weeks for our fireside chat version. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.